Hello, my name is Michail Sousa, and I'm going to do this lecture about serious games and how can we use maps and use some of the game mechanisms, analog game mechanisms, to transform the maps into games where we can use to explore a city, for example. So the title is Serious Play Over a Map, Exploring Analog Game Mechanisms. First of all, we need to define what are games and what are serious games. So a game is a system in which players engage in artificial conflict defined by rules that results in quantifiable outcomes. This is a definition by Salon and Zimmerman in the book Rules of Play, which is a book that I recommend. It's one of the seminal and one of the most important books about what are games and how can we use them and how can we create them. But when we start to use games for other purposes beyond entertainment, we can find a lot of different concepts and different definitions. For example, we found some approaches that define themselves as gamification. What is a gamification? Gamification is when we use elements of games into non-game activities. And we can see a lot of these examples, for example, in social media, where we can see some of the game mechanisms like, or as adaptations of the leaderboards, the badges, the points and the rewards associated that provide us feedback and incentivizes the users to do some type of behavior. Another approach is the serious games. That is the approach that I'm going to focus here in this lecture. A serious game is a game to achieve fun, and we say here fun is a type of engagement because there's a lot of ways that we can engage people in. It's not fun as something that needs to be funny, but it's something that needs to be engaging so that the players and the participants want to participate and to make all the process from start to finish. So this is games to achieve this engagement and achieve serious goals at the same time. So a serious game needs to achieve all of this, and we use this in architecture, engineering, and urban planning, for example, for the participants to create a better city, to find and to discover new things that they do not were aware of at the start of a process, for example. But there are some problems related to the use of games. For example, game models are not simulations because our games need to engage the users. Sometimes they deliberately do not try to simulate reality as it is. They try to define as an experience that is different from reality. It is similar, but it's more compelling. It's more engaging for the user. So sometimes we remove part of the simulation to provide or to produce a better game. And there's several prejudices about the game usages in practices. For example, mostly among older users, they think that all the games are for children and cannot be taken seriously, but it depends on the game, of course. Analog games demand facilitation and heavy logistics. This is a problem of using analog games, but we try to find some ways to make this easier. And digital games tend to cost much more to develop than analog games, but we can use some existing games, although they might not be as adapted for our reality as we need or as we wanted. And complex games can have higher barriers for users. For example, if the user or the participants do not have a lot of game experience, it can be problematic because they will be much harder for them to use and to play the game. Here's some examples. City Skylines, a very well-known city builder digital game. We can model some cities and create playable models. And here, for example, the case of Minecraft that is very popular, especially among children and younger adults. We can use them to model spaces and create collaborative spaces, digital spaces where the users can create and define what they would like, for example, for a public space. But what distinguishes analog games from the digital games? Analog games do not have automation, so they force player agencies. Physical components to maneuver and engage the participants is something good that we want. And face-to-face interaction and communication, that is very important when you want to establish a collaborative process. They have transparent game systems. What we see, it's what the game is about. Nothing is hidden from the user eyes. And the rules are codified for direct human interaction without any other interfaces and any other associated software or things that can harm the interaction. They allow to pause and adapt to players and contexts in real time. This is a great strength because sometimes we need to adapt this game to the users as we are conducting, for example, a urban planning process. Now I'm going to show some examples of my work. We can adapt some games, for example, to play over maps, and we can use some of the game mechanisms like drawing mechanisms to play over maps and over parts of maps. This is an example where a game about storytelling that demanded the players to draw something over a sheet of paper to be playable over a map. Another example, we can use color pieces to locate information on the map. This is important in this case where the cubes were related to spreadsheets and the cubes represented different things in the map. We can combine the pieces between themselves to generate game effects. Here, for example, we have little cubes, big cubes, and the little cubes represent, for example, the capacities of the bigger cubes that represent land uses, for example, and the strings represent the connections between the transport system and the connection between these places. We can do some very fast approaches. In this example, this is a map, and the colored strings were the only components that the participants had to manipulate to add to the map, and these colored strings were a way to represent the transport system over a map. We can use also with tables and spreadsheets to record and to create tracks where we can record progression bars and record urban indicators, for example, the level of inhabitants, the level of pollution, the level of the capacity of the facilities, the schools, anything we want. We can do this easily with some pieces and some bars and some tracking bars. We can use this physical 3D components, these simple ones, these white ones that are cubes and little houses. We can give them to the users so they can model urban zone. And this was the case in a game that I created for children, and they model the space before playing the actual game. We can use these same models with pieces so we can increase tangibility, and this is something to foster and to engage the users to interact with each other. We can see here the children interacting with the buildings and with each other's, creating a collective city. Some of this methodology, this can be very deep, but I'm going to share here a small example just to frame what this was all about. For example, the designer that creates the game defined the mechanisms and the narrative for the game, and this creates the game system. That is the game components, the narrative, the mechanisms, all the pieces that create the game. Then the player make decisions. Here we want games where the player's decisions impact the game system. This is why we can establish this as a collaborative and a participatory process, because the decisions need to have some impact. And this provides a result, and then the result can be related to the playability and end with the impact and meaning, and this relates also with the designer and the player, and then we do multiple cycles until we got the type of game that we need and in the project demand, for example. In another way, we have, it is usually how the projects start. We define our objectives. What do we want with our game? For example, it can be a game to create awareness about urban heritage in the specific part of a city. And then we define our requirements, what we want, or how much time will it take to play the game, how many players can participate, what is the budget, how many money can we spend in the project. And then the game designer defines the game system, and then the players interact with the game system that generate the experiences. And the experiences are the part that connect to the serious game goals. Usually our goal is the experience, and we need to evaluate this and then create several cycles until we have what we desire and what we want with our project. Some common mechanisms just to frame, for example, this is a tech track or 3 bars mechanisms where you can create pyramids or can create a single track. This is to record our progress and evolution. This is good, for example, for urban indicators. We have another mechanism that is connections, can create these connections with tiles, with pieces, with strings. And when we connect two entities, we create a new system, a new reality. And sometimes this is a goal of the games to connect parts. For example, in the city, to connect with the transport system, some buildings or some zones. Another example that is very used in analog games is tile placement, is when we add pieces to a board or use the pieces to create a board, to create a map, to change a map. And this can be done by simply choosing and placing the tiles and the pieces near each other and create a new reality, a new representation of our city. And when we do serious games, we need to do some kind of debriefing. We need to construct. Our construct is our game. We need to deconstruct, so to analyze what were the player behaviors during the games, and then to reconstruct is to state what we have learned during the process. Usually we have a facilitator that does this and let the players for themselves discover and learn through the game. And this as a collective learning process at the end of the session, and we can then conclude what we desired and conclude and evaluate if the serious game achieved the results. Most of the times the results are reached in this phase, and you need to evaluate after talk with the users if the experience was positive or not, and this part is really important. Now we're going to set you and to give you some objectives and some challenges and some tips also to do it. So we propose that you can create a game for yourself, and this game is to identify learning spaces and activities in the city. Objective and thematic driving process. So we need to follow these steps. Choose an urban zone, a city, a neighborhood, a street, a park. Identify individual buildings, urban spaces. Identify what can we learn in those buildings in urban spaces. What type of activities, stories can we find them? So this is our purpose. And make a track to record the level of learning potentials of each case and identify the learning possibilities. For example, what can we do in a park? And we have here an example. So this is your purpose to create this, a simple game where we can identify and learn what can we do in those spaces. And practice, some tips. So we can choose a map. For example, Google Maps is okay. You can create tiles that represent buildings, roads, public spaces. You can do this using the tile place mechanisms. You can represent the buildings by colors, by shapes, by icons. You can create miniatures, but it's harder, so tiles is okay. You can make tracks to record the learning potential, for example, tracking mechanisms, scale bars that represent the intensity, and define some thresholds to write and add information. For example, can be added with post-its. For example, a scale bar from 1 to 10, and having space to create, to add the post-its and add the comments from the users. You should test this, play it yourself, and invite colleagues to play it also, and play it with children, and then test again and see the results. Some of the references are related to some of my work that I've been creating in publishing. And I thank you for your attention and hope that this was useful. You can do this proposed exercise. Thank you.